A single runner, barefoot and swift, slipped from village to village under cover of darkness. In each pueblo, he whispered the same message: "It is time." The year was 1680, and for decades the Pueblo people had endured the iron rule of Spanish colonizers, forced labor, brutal punishments, and the destruction of their sacred traditions. But now, in secret meetings beneath moonlit skies, a plan had taken shape. It was not just a revolt, it was a reckoning. This was no spontaneous uprising. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign, led by a man who had once been broken by Spanish cruelty, but had risen again as a symbol of defiance. Popé, a Tewa spiritual leader, had united the scattered Pueblo nations in a way never seen before. Their goal was clear: drive the Spaniards from their land or die trying. As dawn broke, the silence that had cloaked the pueblos shattered into chaos. Fires roared in the distance, cries echoed across the valleys, and history was about to change forever. For nearly a century, the Spanish had claimed dominion over the Pueblo lands, carving out missions and imposing their will with fire and steel. When Francisco Vázquez de Coronado first arrived in 1540, he came seeking gold. What he found instead were thriving communities rooted in ancient traditions. Over time, more Spaniards followed, establishing settlements and forcing conversion to Christianity. By the early 1600s, Franciscan missionaries had built churches in nearly every pueblo, tearing down kivas, the sacred underground chambers where pueblo ceremonies took place, and punishing those who clung to their old beliefs. The encomienda system forced Pueblo men into labor, building roads and tending fields for Spanish settlers. Droughts and famine struck repeatedly, yet the colonizers demanded tribute, leaving many villages on the brink of starvation. Meanwhile, disease swept through the region, killing thousands. The Pueblos watched their world shrink, their leaders imprisoned or executed, their children torn from them. Yet, amid this suffering, resistance began to take root, not in open battle, but in quiet defiance and whispered plans. In the Pueblo people, one man stood apart, not for his wealth or rank, but for the fire in his spirit. Popé, a Tewa spiritual leader from San Juan Pueblo, had long resisted Spanish rule. He saw how the invaders crushed the old ways, forbidding sacred dances, destroying shrines, and branding traditional healers as witches. In 1675, Governor Juan Francisco Trevino arrested Popé and 47 other spiritual leaders, accusing them of sorcery. 3 were hanged. Others were whipped and imprisoned. Popé bore the lash and the humiliation, but he did not break. When released, he vanished into the mountains, carrying with him the scars of Spanish cruelty and the seed of rebellion. Word of his survival spread like wind through dry grass. In hidden gatherings, he spoke of a future free from foreign rule. He called upon the gods, promising that if the people cast off Spanish ways and returned to their ancestors' teachings, they would be strong again. His words stirred hearts. His vision gave purpose, and soon warriors from every corner of the Pueblo world began to listen. Popé moved swiftly, sending runners to every pueblo, from Taos in the north to Zuni in the west. He knew that secrecy was their greatest weapon. If the Spanish learned of the plot too soon, they would crush it before it could begin. Each messenger carried a knotted cord, a silent signal telling the people when to strike. 12 knots marked the days until the uprising. 1 knot was removed each morning, counting down to the moment when the pueblos would rise together. But unity was not easy to maintain. The pueblos were many, each with its own language, traditions, and leaders. Some feared failure, others doubted Popé's power. Yet as the days passed, the weight of shared suffering bound them tighter. They trained in secret, gathering weapons, bows and arrows, stolen muskets, sharpened stones. Women wove ropes to scale church walls. Children carried messages between villages, and in every home, families prepared for what lay ahead. The tension grew thick as the final day approached. Would they succeed, or would their hopes burn like dry brush in the wind? On August 10, 1680, the 12-knot was cut. At dawn, the pueblos rose as one. In every direction, smoke curled into the sky as villages erupted in violence. Warriors surged through the streets of Santa Fe, dragging priests from their beds and hacking down church doors. In Cochiti, the people stormed the mission, setting fire to the altar where Spanish bells had once tolled over their suffering. In Isleta, the rebels seized horses and supplies, turning the tools of conquest against their masters. Panic spread among the Spanish. Soldiers scrambled to mount defenses, but they were outnumbered and unprepared. The pueblos struck fast and hard, cutting off supply lines and ambushing patrols. By midday, hundreds of Spaniards lay dead. Governors, priests, soldiers, and settlers alike. Survivors fled toward Santa Fe, hoping to regroup, but even there, danger loomed. The city's gates groaned under the force of the attackers. The siege had begun. For the first time in living memory, the pueblos held the upper hand, and they would not let go. Santa Fe stood as the heart of Spanish power in New Mexico, and now it became the battleground for the fate of an empire. As news of the uprising spread, terrified settlers and soldiers rushed into the city, seeking refuge behind its adobe walls. Governor Antonio Otermin, newly appointed and untested in war, took command of the desperate defense. He ordered all available men to guard the gates and sent messengers racing southward begging for reinforcements from El Paso. But outside the walls, the Pueblo forces gathered in greater numbers. Armed with captured muskets, bows, and clubs, they surrounded the city, cutting off escape. Smoke rose from burning homes and churches beyond the walls, the scent of scorched wood mixing with the acrid fear of the trapped Spaniards. On August 13th, the Pueblos launched their first full-scale assault. Arrows rained down on the defenders. Shouts of fury echoed across the narrow streets. The Spanish fired back, but their bullets could not stop the tide. Still, Santa Fe did not fall. The walls held, for now. But within the city, food was running low, and hope was slipping away. Inside Santa Fe, hunger gnawed at the survivors. Water was scarce, and wounds festered without medicine. Governor Otermin knew that if help did not arrive soon, surrender would be inevitable. He ordered desperate sorties to break through the Pueblo lines, but each ended in bloodshed. Outside the walls, the Pueblos faced their own struggles. Though victorious so far, they lacked the heavy weapons needed to breach the city's defenses. Supplying such a large force stretched their resources thin. Yet, despite these hardships, morale remained high. The sight of Spanish banners falling and churches burning fueled their resolve. Every passing hour proved that the colonizers were not invincible. But victory demanded sacrifice. Many Pueblo warriors fell in battle, their bodies left unburied as fighting raged on. Families mourned in silence, knowing that their struggle was not yet won. The siege dragged on, testing both sides. Would the walls hold? Would the Pueblos break? No one could say. But one truth was clear. The world had changed, and there was no turning back. By August 21st, the situation inside Santa Fe had grown dire. Starvation and disease weakened the defenders, while relentless attacks wore down their spirits. Governor Otermin made a final decision. He would attempt a desperate breakout. Under cover of night, the remaining Spaniards gathered what supplies they could and prepared for flight. At dawn, they burst through the city gates, swords drawn, muskets firing. The Pueblos, expecting another siege, were momentarily stunned. Chaos erupted. The Spanish fought their way through the encircling forces, abandoning everything except their lives. Those who could not keep up were left behind, slaughtered or taken prisoner. The retreat became a rout. Fleeing southward along the Rio Grande, they stumbled through the desert, pursued by warriors eager to finish what had begun. By September, fewer than 2,000 Spaniards remained in New Mexico. Most had perished or escaped to El Paso. For the first time in over a century, the land belonged to its original people.
the Great Pueblo Revolt had succeeded. But the question remained, what would come next? With the Spanish gone, the Pueblos set about restoring what had been lost. Villages once filled with fear now echoed with song and prayer. Kivas, long forbidden, rose from the dust. Sacred fires burned once more. Popé, hailed as the architect of victory, traveled from pueblo to pueblo, urging his people to abandon all traces of Spanish influence. Churches were torn down, crosses burned, and converts urged to return to their ancestral beliefs. Yet the triumph was not without its challenges. Without the Spanish presence, trade routes dried up, and the absence of European goods created new hardships. Some pueblos struggled to feed themselves, lacking the livestock and farming tools the colonizers had controlled.
Though the Pueblos had driven the Spanish from their land, they knew the enemy would not stay away forever. In El Paso, survivors of the revolt gathered, sharing stories of horror and loss. The Crown of Spain, humiliated by the defeat, vowed to reclaim New Mexico. Military leaders debated strategies. Missionaries pleaded for vengeance. But for now, the frontier remained quiet. The Pueblos used this time wisely, reinforcing their alliances and preparing for what lay ahead. Popé worked tirelessly to maintain unity, knowing that division would spell disaster. Yet cracks had already begun to form. Some villages hesitated to destroy all remnants of Spanish rule, fearing retribution if the colonists ever returned. Others sought to preserve certain European tools and animals, recognizing their usefulness. These tensions threatened the very foundation of the revolt. Meanwhile, rumors spread of Apache raids, exploiting the power vacuum left by the Spanish withdrawal. The Pueblos had won their freedom, but holding on to it would prove an even greater challenge. As the years passed, the reality of self-rule settled upon the Pueblos. Without the Spanish presence, trade with the outside world dwindled. Horses, once abundant, became harder to replace. Weapons rusted, and gunpowder ran low. The delicate balance between villages began to fray. Popé, once a unifying force, faced growing opposition. Some questioned his strict rejection of all Spanish customs, arguing that certain tools and practices could aid survival. Others resented his authority, believing that leadership should be shared rather than centralized. In 1688, Popé died, though the cause remains uncertain. Some say he succumbed to illness, others whisper of betrayal. His death left a void that no single leader could fill. Without his guiding hand, rivalries between pueblos deepened. The unity that had made the revolt possible unraveled. Then, in 1692, a new threat emerged. Diego de Vargas, a determined Spanish governor, marched north with a small force, claiming peaceful intentions. But the Pueblos knew better. The fight for their land was far from over. In 1692, Diego de Vargas arrived in Santa Fe with a small army and a bold claim. New Mexico belonged to Spain once more. He did not come with cannons or open battle, but with promises. He offered peace, protection, and the right to practice their faith, so long as the Pueblos swore loyalty to the Spanish crown. Some villages, weary of war and hardship, accepted his terms. Others refused. Tensions flared as de Vargas pressed forward, demanding submission. By 1693, hostilities erupted anew. Spanish soldiers clashed with Pueblo warriors in scattered battles, but the old unity had crumbled. Without a leader like Popé, the resistance fractured. In 1696, a final uprising shook the region. Pueblo warriors struck at Spanish missions, killing priests and settlers. But the response was swift and brutal. Spanish troops hunted down the rebels, crushing the last major resistance. By 1698, Spanish control was firmly restored. The Great Pueblo Revolt had ended. Yet, though the Spaniards reclaimed the land, they did so with caution. They allowed limited religious freedom and softened their rule. The Pueblos, though subdued, endured. The legacy of the Great Pueblo Revolt did not end with Spanish reoccupation. It lingered in the hearts of the people, shaping the course of history in ways both visible and unseen. Though the Spaniards regained control, they ruled with a lighter hand, wary of provoking another uprising. Missions continued, but indigenous traditions survived in secret, woven into Catholic rituals in ways only the faithful could recognize. The revolt also sent shockwaves through colonial powers across the Americas. Other native nations took note. Resistance was possible. Decades later, during the American Revolution, revolutionaries would draw inspiration from the Pueblo struggle, seeing in their struggle a reflection of their own fight for independence. Today, the story of Popé and his people remains a testament to resilience. Statues stand in his honor, and annual commemorations mark the day the Pueblos cast off their chains. The revolt was not just a battle. It was a declaration that no people, no matter how oppressed, are powerless forever. The fire lit in 1680 still burns, reminding the world that courage can change the course of history. The Great Pueblo Revolt teaches us that oppression does not guarantee obedience. It shows that even in the face of overwhelming force, determination and unity can shift the course of history. Popé understood that survival meant more than enduring hardship. It meant reclaiming identity, culture, and autonomy. His movement was not merely about casting out the Spanish, but about restoring a way of life nearly erased by colonization. The revolt was also a warning. Unity once achieved is difficult to maintain. Internal divisions weakened the Pueblos after their victory, making them vulnerable to reconquest. Leadership matters, and without strong, shared purpose, even the most powerful movements can falter. Yet despite eventual Spanish dominance, the Pueblos never truly surrendered. Their traditions persisted, their stories endured, and their descendants continue to thrive today. The revolt reminds us that resistance takes many forms, some loud, some silent, but all significant. And above all, it proves that history is not written solely by the victors, but by those who dare to defy. Behind the grand narrative of rebellion and resistance lie countless personal stories, tales of ordinary people who risked everything for freedom. Women played a vital role in the revolt, supplying warriors, preserving knowledge, and ensuring the survival of their communities. Some carried messages between villages, braving capture and torture. Others guarded sacred sites, protecting the spiritual heart of their people. Children grew up in a world turned upside down, witnessing both the horrors of war and the hope of liberation. Among the warriors were elders who had known a time before Spanish rule, passing down their wisdom to younger generations. Even animals bore the burden of conflict. Horses, once symbols of Spanish dominance, became tools of survival for the Pueblos. The revolt was not just a political event, it was a human one. Each act of defiance, whether striking a blow or simply refusing to forget the old ways, contributed to the larger struggle. These untold sacrifices remind us that history is not shaped only by great leaders, but by the collective will of a people determined to endure. The Great Pueblo Revolt reshaped the identity of the Pueblo nations in ways that still echo today. Before 1680, Spanish rule had imposed a rigid hierarchy, suppressing indigenous governance and erasing cultural practices. After the revolt, even under renewed Spanish control, the Pueblos retained a newfound sense of agency. They learned that resistance was possible, that unity could overcome even the most entrenched oppression. This awareness altered their relationship with colonial powers. While outward compliance became necessary for survival, inner defiance remained. Religious syncretism flourished, blending Catholic rites with traditional beliefs in ways that outsiders often failed to recognize. Governance structures adapted, balancing Spanish-imposed systems with ancestral leadership models. Over time, these adaptations became part of a broader strategy of cultural preservation. The Pueblos did not merely survive, they evolved, using the lessons of 1680 to navigate centuries of shifting power. Their resilience became a defining trait, influencing later struggles for sovereignty and self-determination. The revolt was not just a moment in history, it was a turning point that forged a lasting identity. The impact of the Great Pueblo Revolt extended far beyond the borders of present-day New Mexico. News of the uprising reached Mexico City, Madrid, and even the courts of Europe. The Spanish crown, shaken by the loss of an entire colony, reassessed its policies in the Americas. Military reforms followed, leading to stronger garrisons and more cautious governance in other regions. Jesuit and Franciscan orders debated how to approach conversion efforts, realizing that forced assimilation bred resistance rather than devotion. In the wider world, the revolt challenged prevailing notions of European superiority. Indigenous peoples were often portrayed as passive subjects of empire, yet here was proof that they could organize, strategize, and overthrow a colonial regime. This awareness altered their relationship with colonial powers. While outward compliance became necessary for survival, inner defiance remained. Religious syncretism flourished, blending Catholic rites with traditional beliefs in ways that outsiders often failed to recognize. Governance structures adapted, balancing Spanish-imposed systems with ancestral leadership models. Over time, these adaptations became part of a broader strategy of cultural preservation. The Pueblos did not merely survive, they evolved, using the lessons of 1680 to navigate centuries of shifting power. Their resilience became a defining trait, influencing later struggles for sovereignty and self-determination. The revolt was not just a moment in history, it was a turning point that forged a lasting identity. Over time, the story of the Great Pueblo Revolt has become more than history. It has entered the realm of myth and memory. Oral traditions among the Pueblo people have preserved details lost to official records, passing down tales of bravery, sacrifice, and renewal. Some versions of the revolt speak of supernatural forces aiding the warriors, of storms rising to shield villages from Spanish retaliation. Others tell of Popé's visions guiding the people through hardship, his voice echoing through dreams. These stories, whether rooted in fact or embellished by time, serve a deeper purpose. They reinforce identity, teach lessons, and ensure that the past is never forgotten. Historians work to separate legend from reality, but both are valuable. Myths carry emotional truths, capturing the fears, hopes, and values of a people. In classrooms, museums, and tribal histories, the revolt is remembered not just as a military victory, but as a moment of spiritual awakening. The events of 1680 live on, not only in books and archives, but in the living memory of those who call the Pueblos home. The Great Pueblo Revolt was not the end of resistance, nor was it the beginning of lasting peace. It was a chapter in an ongoing struggle, one that continues to shape the lives of indigenous peoples today. The themes of autonomy, cultural preservation, and defiance against oppression remain relevant across the world. From modern legal battles over land rights to efforts to revive endangered languages, the echoes of 1680 can still be heard. The revolt reminds us that history is not static. It is a living force, shaping present and future alike. Understanding what happened in those months of fire and fury helps us see the broader patterns of colonization, resistance, and resilience. It also invites reflection on the nature of power, who holds it, how it is maintained, and how it can be challenged. The Pueblos showed that even the most entrenched rule can be overturned. Their story is not just of the past, but a guidepost for those who seek justice, dignity, and self-determination in any age. More than 3 centuries have passed since the Great Pueblo Revolt, yet its flame still burns in the hearts of those who remember. Every generation finds new meaning in its story, drawing strength from the courage of those who dared to rise. Popé's name is etched in stone and honored in ceremony, but his true legacy lies in the endurance of the Pueblo people. Their languages, their traditions, their right to govern themselves, all bear the imprint of that struggle. The revolt taught a powerful lesson, that resistance is not always loud, nor immediate in its success, but it leaves behind seeds that may one day grow into something greater. Across the world, indigenous nations look to the Pueblos as an example of perseverance, Their fight was not just for land, but for identity, for the right to exist on their own terms. And so the story of 1680 remains alive, passed from elder to child, from scholar to student, from one generation to the next. It is a reminder that no people are ever truly conquered so long as they remember who they are.